So overall, the science cluster involves 9 different research projects or sub-projects, and then a communication branch, and so part of it. And so I'm going to touch on each of these very quickly. The presentations that we have through the rest of this morning and into the afternoon include some of the researchers that are actually working in the science cluster. So the first one was biologically based fertility management, and so this is managing soil fertility. So for those of you who are visiting from the school, the grade 11 class, organic agriculture is grounded in the soil, pardon the pun, but they need to have a really solid base to work from. In order to grow healthy plants, you have to have a healthy soil. And one of the big issues that we're dealing with in organic is phosphorus. It's one of the nutrients that plants have to have in order to grow. And we're not sure if we can sustain the phosphorus levels in the soil properly. And one of the big factors that affect how easily phosphorus is absorbed out of the soil or is used by plants is the relationship between the plant and a fungus that grows in the soil. And this fungus, called a mycorrhizae, interacts with the root of the plant and basically acts like an extension of the root system and can access more nutrients out of the soil. But it's really hard to account for that, and this is what Dr. Hamel at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Dr. Lynch at the NSAC are working on, is trying to figure out how the mycorrhizal fungi, the fungus, is interacting in the soil with the crop to affect phosphorus uptake in the plant, and how the management practices in the fields affect that. The next sub-project is called Integrated Grain-Based Cropping Systems. So this is really the prairie-based grain production sub-project, and there's overall 4 research activities that are going on, and some of these are going to be talked about in the session today, including the one on reducing soil disturbance, low-till production systems, and building soil fertility, which involves the Glen Lee rotation study. Both of those are led by Dr. Martin Entz at the University of Manitoba. And we also have a weed control project that involves Dr. Shurtleff, and he'll be speaking right shortly. So the one that isn't covered today is the one relating to organic seed production. And so there's funding that's going towards organic wheat breeding and organic oat breeding. And so it's a collaboration of organic breeders, cereal breeders across the prairies. And what they have found is that first they went through an exercise of justifying, well, is it worthwhile actually breeding grain crops for organic production systems? And they have found that yes, indeed, it is worthwhile doing that you can get responses if you develop a plant under organic management versus conventional management. You will get a better response. It doesn't happen all the time, but nothing happens all the time with wheat breeding, and so it does pay off. So now they're involved in developing organic cereal crop varieties, and we're really excited to see where that develops. For the other topics, I'll let the speakers in the session describe those ones in more detail. The next sub-project is organic greenhouse production, and we keep hearing well, basically because we live in the north, in Canada, we can't be producing fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. And so there is a lot of interest in figuring out how can we replace some of those tomatoes and other vegetables that are being produced in California and being shipped up into Canada throughout the winter period. And so really it's about extending the growing season, and so they call it season extension. And these are all strategies that are being evaluated in greenhouse production in Quebec. There's some really big markets in Quebec, and so we're some very dedicated organic consumers there, and so the greenhouses there are quite interested in trying to capture some of that market. And 5 minutes? Okay. So one of the key things that they're involved in is energy use efficiency. And what they're doing is really, really innovative, and the conventional greenhouse sector is starting to look at what the organic science cluster is doing, because they're saying this is so innovative that we might be interested in doing this as well. So the organic greenhouse production is really, really fascinating to watch. We then have horticultural crops. Organic is often associated it's an entry point for most consumers, is the vegetable side of it. And so there's production research going on in pest control, nitrogen rotation, nitrogen in rotations, transplanting vegetables, looking at seedling transplant processes, and looking at new crops like pumpkin, which basically right now most of the pumpkin seed that's being used in Canada is being produced in China. So it has to be imported, and so we're looking, and there's no reason why we can't be growing pumpkins, especially in parts of Ontario and so on. So we have research on pumpkins as well. There's a sub-project that relates to environmental stewardship and product branding, and Dr. Lynch covered this in a lot of detail this morning, talking about the environmental importance. And we really need to start promoting the whole production system of organic and the environmental benefits of it to the consumer, but we have to have the science to support it. And so most of the research that's going on is a modeling research with Dr. Lynch involved and Dr. Rod McRae at York University, looking at farm-scale energy and global warming issues. Next, we have the high-value fruit production side of it, and so this is looking at, includes research that I'm doing on black currants, but also on blueberries and apples and some small berries like strawberry and raspberries, again under high tunnels, so season extension strategies in Quebec. So very interesting work on really high value crops, and looking at, again, trying to replace some of those imports coming in from the US and elsewhere. We do have some research that's going on looking at benchmarking in organic dairy systems. Are organic dairy systems providing really good high quality milk, and where do we have room for improvement? Are we providing the animal welfare considerations that organic is touting to be a real advantage over conventional farms? So there's a lot of work being done on animal health and welfare, and trying to see how the successful organic dairy farms in Ontario are really stacking up. We have one project that's related to food processing, and that one hasn't started yet, but it is intended to look at replacing or reducing the nitrite and nitrate use in cured meats. And so that was the one processing project that we had included in this cluster. The last one on the livestock side is sheep parasite control. There's a fair bit of interest in sheep production in Ontario, and parasites are a huge issue in sheep. And so and the results of this research actually can be used in other, as a template for beef as well. So they're focusing on how the larvae overwinter and get carried forward into future the rest of the flock. So, and how pasture management and so on affects it. So it's an interesting project. So that's a really, really quick overview. Obviously, I don't have time to cover it all in a lot of detail, and there's a lot of projects, and we'll have some of the prairie relevant ones coming up here shortly. The big question is where to next, and we're starting to plan for the next organic science cluster, which will start in 2013. And we're trying to identify what are the research priorities in production, marketing, consumer education, and the environment. And do you have ideas for addressing some of these problems? And that's actually what I want to talk about at the end of the session this afternoon, is to hear your ideas about research needs that you have, and success stories that you've had in dealing with some of the problems that are being identified. So we'll touch on that a little bit more later. So with that, I'll wrap up.